Hello again, Guyana, and welcome to another edition of Conversations in State. I'm Malika Ramsey. Thanks so very much for joining us. This week, we will continue on our path regarding the environment, the interesting things that are happening for and in our environment right here at home. And when I say continue, I mean, I know the last program we had, we focused on the Gaming Authority and we had the CEO of the Gaming Authority. So that means we took a break from the environment. So we're returning to the environment. And you have heard so much about green initiative, green state, green economy, everything green when it comes to our country. And I'm happy to report that today we're going to be talking about the Green State Development Strategy. On previous programs, for example, conversations with the head of the Department of the Environment, you would have heard about the Green State Development Strategy. But today we're going to be focusing specifically on it, just not simply mentioning it or brushing across. And it is my pleasure to welcome to Conversations in State I'm going to call her the expert who will talk about the Green State Development Strategy. And of course, when you hear me say GSDS, I'm talking about the Green State Development Strategy. And welcome to the program, Miss Aretha Forde. She is the Stakeholder Management Coordinator in the Department of the Environment. Welcome to Conversations in State,
Good
Aretha.
afternoon, and thank you very much.
All right, it is a pleasure to have you. Well, this is really big, the Green State Development Strategy. As I said before, we've heard so much about it, and every time we talk about green initiative and green economy, we just gloss over it. But today you're going to talk about some of the details.
Yes.
Viewers, we can't possibly get to everything regarding that in half hour, but she's going to do what she can today, and subsequently, eventually, she'll come back on the program and so on. But first off, before I talk about the purpose of the GSDS, what is your role as stakeholder management coordinator?
All right, so I think the role basically speaks for itself. Stakeholder is any person or entity that has a role to play in the job that you're doing. And of course, at the DOE, our job is to provide oversight for the management of the environmental sector in Guyana. So the agencies that fall under the DOE include the Environmental Protection Agency, the Protected Areas Commission, the Guyana Wildlife Management and Conservation Commission, and the National Parks Commission.
That's a lot to have
Yes,
on the
it's
department.
4 agencies, and of course, we think that there should be more because, as we say, the environment is everything.
Oh,
It's everything that is around us.
so there is room for more agencies regarding addressing our environment. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Interesting. All right, let's. I'd like to come back to that eventually, but let's talk about the GSDS. Now, what is the
Yes.
purpose of the Green State Development Strategy?
All right. So I want to backtrack a bit.
No problem.
Because you mentioned, green initiatives, green this, green that, and I know that has been mentioned quite a bit by His Excellency.
Yeah.
And, persons get carried away with the idea that going green is about, painting our buildings
We
green,
still don't quite
wearing
understand
green
it.
shirts, and I don't think they quite understand what the concept of going green is about. And it's something that we have been doing as Guyanese for years and years. So every time you reuse that plastic bag, every time you use your manure to fertilize your plants, every time you choose to carpool or park and do your errands, that's all part of going green. So
Okay.
the concept of going green is about keeping the environment in mind when it comes to our actions. And I must say, as a country, Guyana has been on the pathway to a green economy for quite some
For
time.
years.
Politically, from the creation of a ministry that looks specifically at the environment to creating a department that has focus on environmental protection, and of course, in now trying to craft a strategy that places environment at the center of development as it should be.
Okay, so it's just a case where we, even though we were actually practicing things and initiatives to move
Yes.
toward that, it's just that we weren't calling it
Right.
a green development strategy or a green state.
No.
Okay.
So these terms, they're developed at every international conference, and so there are countries that have already started to pursue a green economy, including some of our CARICOM neighbors. Jamaica and Barbados are prime examples of countries that have pursued a green economy. And when we talk about green economy, we're talking about having all three pillars of sustainable development occurring at the same time. So we want to see diversified economic growth and development. We want to see social justice and inclusion, and to have environmental protection all occurring at the same time. And it is possible. Other countries have shown us that it is possible, and we need to get on board or we will be left behind.
Indeed, I was going to come to that, and I'm happy that you mentioned Jamaica, and I think Barbados is the other country you mentioned, because I was going to ask if in your department you have seen an opening whereby you can use those countries as patterns, as best practices to further develop our own green initiative here.
Yes, and there's a wonderful video on YouTube that shows the transformation of Jamaica into a green economy.
Okay, so they're ahead of us.
Yes.
They're both ahead of us.
That is fine. That is fine. We'll get there.
Okay.
We'll get there.
Yeah, I have confidence, especially with people like you working there who are passionate about it. And as you were saying earlier, that you have to have a passion for it. Let's talk about that strategy of itself now.
So what we have currently is a framework for the strategy.
Okay.
So it's basically the blueprint for what you want your house to look like. And once we develop that strategy, it is our roadmap to a green economy. So think of it as you plug in, in your car on your GPS. I want to get to X place. And in our case, X place is to achieve the green economy. And in order to get there, we need to craft a strategy, because you don't just get there by clicking your fingers or just going about business as usual. And so the president, I believe that it's when he came back from Paris.
Yes.
Yes. That was the defining moment to see Guyana's development needs to be on a certain pathway. And the GSDS, once it's formulated, that is how we get there.
Okay.
So the strategy is basically our roadmap.
I read that roadmap and that guide should be giving us direction for the next 15 years.
Yes.
What are you, not only as a person, but as a department, as a team, expecting to benefit in 15 years for our country? Where are you expecting us to be, if you can specifically point that out at this point in time?
All right, so it's not a singular place.
Okay.
Because the strategy, it looks at the holistic development of Guyana, whereas previous plans and development papers would have been sector-based. Climate resilience strategy and action plan, even the LCDS, as good as it was still a sector-based strategy. So it's expected that the country as a whole will be transformed when we would have started to implement the GSDS and the targets that we would have set under that strategy.
I'm happy that you mentioned implementation, because now we're coming to themes, and two of them I focused on, and I know you'll talk about the others. Basically, job creation. That is always a big issue. Any part of the world you go, it talks about job creation, and also more or less achieving human resource development. How? I'd like you to talk about those two, and then I know there are others that you would also want to focus on.
All right, so the objective of the strategy is to reorient and diversify Guyana's economy. And with a diversification of economic activities, there are more employment opportunities. So everybody is not rushing to go into gold mining or to go into forestry. There are a number of options that will be made available. And of course, the role of the private sector, that is supposed to be the engine of growth for any country, cannot be overstated enough.
Indeed.
So job creation is important. And I remember back in January at the first Green Conversation, and this is another activity under the GSDS program, the Green Conversations, where we bring in international speakers who would have had experience with green economy, And we were fortunate to have Mr. Pavan Sukhdev. He is now the president of WWF International, I believe, or Conservation International. And he made mention of something that struck me. He said, if you take a look at the developed countries, they all have one thing in common, and that is a highly developed human sector.
Yes,
So
indeed.
you
People
look,
are better off.
um,
Uh,
and not just better off in terms of social services, but the number of people who have their masters, who have
Education
doctorates,
wise.
education wise, they're engaged in critical thinking. The STEM field is strong in that country. Those are the countries that have been ranked as highly developed countries. So we talk about Japan, we talk about countries like Australia, a few European countries have made it there, China, of course. So the human capital must be developed in order for you to move to that green
forward.
economy. Because if you talk about diversification, of course, you're talking not only about the hard skills, but you need to have people in that STEM field developing new technologies.
Okay. I'm happy that you talked about that gentleman who gave some very good advice, and it brings me to, in a sense, to funding and finances. I don't know how much of that you can talk about because I know there's
Yes.
snippets of it inside the
Yes.
strategy of itself. Let's talk about, apart from the local funding and the local support that you will obviously get, let's talk about the international contribution.
All right. So this is great
Mhm.
because the president has rallied international support
Mhm.
for the development of the GSDS. So the Ministry of the Presidency, through the Department of Environment, is leading the way on crafting this strategy, and we are receiving technical support from the United Nations Environment Program. And it's through this contact with GSDS that they're looking to set up an office here. So we have another member of the UN country team joining Guyana.
Okay.
And I think this is great because it will bring in more grant funds, more loans, and that kind of financial input that we need in the country.
Yeah, that is very necessary indeed. Have you missed any? Do you think you've missed any of the themes so far in the GSTS?
Yes,
Yes,
I
because
have.
I know you're so passionate, so you went into
Yes,
other
I
areas,
know,
but
but we must talk about the money because the GSDS, as I said, private sector investment is needed. And I like the idea that the miner had to invest his earnings into a resort, right? And this is a way of creating employment. It's looking at a sector that is dependent on the environment, yes, but reduces ecological scarcity, and of course, creates employment. That's our career. Not our career.
RY, yes.
Yes.
I realized I was searching my mind, and viewers are
Yes.
very familiar
Yes.
with that. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, this is Conversations in States. Today we are talking with Ms. Aretha Forde from the Department of the Environment, obviously, and we're focusing on the Green State Development Strategy. As I did say earlier, you have heard on so many conversations on this very program when we speak to representatives of the Department of the Environment. You've heard so much about, in a very glossed over manner, about the Green State Development Strategy. Today you're getting some more details, and I believe that Aretha is the expert on what's happening with that. Let's talk some more about because I know there are other things that you would want to get in the public domain regarding the strategy of itself, and why all of Guyana, as many people who will get the time to go through it and understand where it is expected to take us. Let's talk some more about that.
All right, so I know the last place we were at is finance, and of course, this is a question that always comes up, like where is the money going to come from? The regional offices have already been educated on what is expected from them as it relates to the GSDS, and so in their budgetary planning, you will see aspects of a green economy being included. And just let me make mention that we are also working very, very closely with the Ministry of Finance because green initiatives have taken their place of prominence in our national budget.
Yes. Hmm.
So for those viewers who would have tuned in and listened, um, green economy is definitely on for Guyana.
Okay. All right. Well, it's good
Yes.
that the money, again, you rightly said we can't do anything without money. So it's good that the money is coming from that. These days I ask everybody about this.
Um,
I try to link oil and green. Let's start oil
yes.
economy and green economy. How will the two overlap, or I should say, how
Mhm.
will the two support each other, especially based
Mhm.
on what we can benefit from the GSTS?
Yes. So I'm glad you mentioned oil because it's somewhat of a taboo subject still,
Mm-hmm.
but we've been blessed with this resource, and we have foreign direct investment, and it's a resource that we have to sell. It's a reality that we cannot run away from, and our government will use the revenues in a wise manner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've already heard plans about setting up that sovereign wealth fund, um, and then taking some of the money to invest into infrastructure projects, which is what other countries who would have sold oil as a resource have done. And of course, to invest into social services like education and improving our healthcare system. And those two are actually part of the thematic, one of the thematic areas of the GSDS.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no need to fear oil in a green economy.
I'm happy you said
There,
fear.
yes, because I know members of the public have concerns about, okay, so we're talking about going green and we're selling oil, but there are countries that have shown us that it's possible to have these two kinds of economies occurring at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe that Guyana can follow suit. And we're already a leader in conservation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing to fear.
Perfect. You talked about education and health and
Mhm.
how they can benefit. Do you believe that especially with the GSCS guide
Mhm.
as a guide, that a green economy, moving quickly towards
Mhm.
and achieving full green economy, even though you did mention earlier that this is not something that is new, we've been doing these things for years.
Yes.
Do you believe that it can also contribute, or I should say, strengthen Guyana's tourism product?
Oh yes, it needs to. The first thematic area deals with green and inclusive structural transformation, creating that enable business environment. For a long time, we've been at the bottom ranks of ease of doing business and all these other international surveys, and we want to move up in the ranks. We want investors to come to Guyana and see the potential. And there's a very spirited young man who comes to a lot of meetings at the DOE, and he talks about ecotourism and the potential to really transform Guyana as a tourism destination. And I know that's something that the Department of Tourism is working on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yes, that particular activity, ecotourism, has its place in Guyana's transformation.
Transformation. All right. Just to give you a break from the GSDS for a while. I know because
Mhm.
I don't want you to come off the program without talking about this because it's not likely that you'll be back before then.
Yes.
I want you to talk about Earth Day.
Yes.
And I know earlier you told me that there is some focus on the harm that plastic is doing for
Oh
us,
yes.
or the harm that it has done for us. Let's talk about that.
Yes. So just let me mention,
Mm-hmm.
um, because when you talk about ecotourism,
Mm-hmm.
it really sparks
Spark something in you.
something.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing about working in government is that you get to travel a lot
Yeah,
throughout the
understand.
country. And I was in Region One with the Protected Areas Commission, and there is so much potential for ecotourism. Like, we have islands in Region One.
Yes, some people don't know
And
that. So
and
viewer, she's teaching
yes,
you today.
and you see the potential for tourism occurring there, and it can really really transform this country. Our country is beautiful.
Mhm.
I can tell you that, and it's something that we need to showcase to the world.
Mhm.
So
Agreed.
We are talking about plastic pollution. Earth Day, like all the other environmental observances that Guyana celebrates, and celebrates is a term that I use very loosely
Loosely.
because when we think, especially about the theme for Earth Day, it's not something that we really want to celebrate.
More or less observe,
Yes, to
observation.
observe. It's looking at ending plastic pollution,
Hmm.
and that is something that has been recognized on a global level, that we are creating materials that, while they're convenient to use at the time, when we discard them,
Long term.
it takes so long to break down in the environment. And of course, it when it breaks down, the material doesn't return to the soil, it's just there in fragments.
Is I, I really want to interject here.
Yes.
We had in I think it's